Liberté is an interesting, albeit a bit rough around the edges, early access roguelite action RPG with a card-based skill system that uses branching paths to advance you through the story and give you at least a limited amount of personal agency as to which way each loop through the story goes. The main overarching theme is that you, the player, are caught in the middle of a revolution that has been interfered with by an eldritch entity known as Lady Bliss, a godlike creature that continues to revive you with the ultimate goal of having you determine who will be the true ruler of this alternative universe version of Paris. To do so, in each loop, you choose which side you'll take in each of the events you come across. This will determine the story beats and enemies you encounter. With each loop, you gain the resources you need to craft the cards you unlock with each cycle, which ends up being more of a lateral meta progression rather than overtly making you stronger like most roguelites, because it's more options for your deck rather than more power directly. This means that ultimately, other than turning the difficulty down, your progress will mostly be based on skill rather than grind, which can both be good and bad depending on your perspective. That said, getting good at this game is fairly reasonable since the controls are straightforward and for the most part there isn't much in the way of obfuscated functions. The combat has improved decently since the early alphas, though admittedly still feels a little muddy as of the recording of this, requiring the player to make more conscious timing decisions rather than necessarily twitchy or spammy decisions, since there is still a bit of punishment for overcommitting to a series of actions. And the game is fairly clear about communicating what actions and repercussions will occur through its visual design, with a ring around your character indicating when an attack is incoming for single target hits, as well as cones, circles, and lines to indicate when an area of effect skill is coming in as well, with visually consistent aspects such as yellow auras for slow effects and very graphically clear flame designs indicating where damage over time will occur. The bosses also, in at least my testing, followed the same rules as normal enemies, just with more wide-reaching and patterned attacks than their weaker counterparts, and I never felt like the boss actions were unreasonable, despite them ramping up the difficulty rather steadily with additional enemies in the combat and more dangerous AoEs. And funnily enough, as you get further into the game, you actually get to bring your own posse as well. That said, there are a handful of quirks that can be blamed on the early access pre-polish. For example, there are a couple areas in the game where, even though these indicators are still present, they can be a little difficult to spot, such as seeing the yellow circle in a brightly lit city street with only slightly different color stones. But for the most part, these seem to be uncommon and will hopefully get filtered out as time progresses. Though a possible recommendation I would make would be to actually change the hazard color of the ring around your character to red instead of yellow. The other nitpicky issue with the game's current early access state is how certain key options for this style of game are missing. While you do have the standards such as volume, controls, and even some limited graphical options such as VSync and resolution, one important aspect of a mouse-driven action RPG is often the ability to lock the mouse cursor within the game's screen, as on stream I actually almost lost a run due to accidentally clicking outside the game on a side monitor in the middle of a boss fight, and did have this happen a couple more times during the off-stream test as well. But outside of this, and a handful of other small polish issues, the core game does seem very promising, and I like the potential I see in it. Though, as with most early access titles, I would recommend watching gameplay of the most recent versions before deciding whether to pull the trigger on buying the game, because the only thing you can guarantee will be in an early access title are those things that you have already seen released, and this is true regardless of how large or small the developer is.